Everyone, welcome to the third talk in the perimenopause series that I am doing this month with Francesca Liparotti in honor of Perimenopause Awareness Month, or Menopause Awareness Month rather. So today we're going to be talking about everything that you need to know about progesterone. Progesterone is a very important hormone when it comes to balancing hormones. So I'm just going to give Francesca an opportunity to join us. Just bear with me for a moment. I'm not quite sure how to go about doing this today. Here we go. And just as we're waiting, thank you everybody who has joined us so far. We're just getting Francesca on board.
Hi.
Yay, okay, we've got you. Welcome.
Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I don't know, this is the third time we've done this, and for some reason I just couldn't work out the take today, but you're here. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, not bad. Haven't been outside yet today. Looks very dull. Don't know how it is where you are.
Well, I went outside this morning at about 6:30 to walk Jacob, my cat, and it was like dark outside, but now actually we had a little bit of a rainy spell and it's beautiful sunny weather now, so probably go outside again after we've done this. But let's just get started for today. We've already got a few people joining us live, so hello and welcome. And I thought I would just kick off today by doing a little bit of a recap, and then I'm going to pass over to Francesca, and she's going to tell us the nitty-gritty and everything else that you need to know. So for the past couple of weeks, we have been talking about perimenopause, and as a reminder, perimenopause is the transition phase towards menopause, because menopause is just one day. It is the day 365 days from the day you had your last period, and then after that you actually become postmenopausal, or people say menopausal sometimes as well. So I think this stage of perimenopause, where hormones are changing, it's almost like the second puberty, as Francesca shared with us before, is very much underlooked by a lot of people. A lot of women know they don't feel great, but they haven't quite acknowledged what's actually happening. So that's what we've been covering in the past two talks, where we looked at the general overview of the hormones, and then last week we looked at estrogen specifically. Today we're going to look at progesterone specifically. And so as a reminder, in a kind of normal healthy cycle, what's usually happening is estrogen is peaking prior to ovulation. So we're getting a surge in estrogen, which is then supposed to technically trigger ovulation. Ovulation happens, and then we produce progesterone as a consequence of ovulating. Now, this gets a little bit tricky when it comes to perimenopause, because sometimes we don't ovulate and then we don't produce adequate progesterone, and then that affects the overall hormone balance. So that's where we really want to go today, and to dive in a little bit deeper into progesterone, how it impacts the body, signs you may be low in progesterone, and then how you can support your body, because this is a transition. If you're a woman, we're all going to go through this transition in different ways. Hormone fluctuations are inevitable, but what isn't often spoken about are all the things you can do to make that transition smoother. And that's what Francesca is here to do with us today. So welcome. And where should we begin? I've obviously given a very, very brief introduction and recap, but what do you think it's important people know about progesterone from the get-go?
Yeah, so I think understanding why it's so important, and then kind of recapping, going into more detail about what you just said about why we start to produce less and less of it in our 40s during perimenopause, and obviously like figuring out what the consequences are of that, because that might help women resonate with certain symptoms that they're experiencing and realize that that's potentially why. And then obviously we'll go through things that block us from ovulating, or kind of, you know, stop it from happening as often as it should and still can in our 40s, and then yeah, obviously go from there. We'll just go into more detail about some of those factors, because some of them are going to be a little bit more relevant to everyone's kind of day to day. So
So
yeah,
why is progesterone important? Tell us that.
Well, so it's really important that, I mean, I'll start off with the fact that ideally, as we've talked about on some of these sessions already, is that in our normal cycling years, we have ideally a nice balance of progesterone and estrogen, and they're in balance together. And the imbalance and the symptoms that come with a hormonal imbalance occur when one or both of those hormones are either too high or too low. And one of the biggest issues, the biggest things that happens at perimenopause is that we will still have quite a lot of estrogen, and it's on a bit of a roller coaster, differently to when we reach menopause, or the closer we get to menopause, we're losing estrogen. In your kind of earlier perimenopausal days, we still have enough, quite a lot of estrogen, and it's also on a roller coaster. So that's causing the kind of symptoms that we talked about last week, which we will talk about today. And then we're also, coupled with that, losing progesterone. So the imbalance is, less progesterone, more or the same amount of estrogen, and it's on a roller coaster, and it's kind of like a double whammy. So the reason progesterone is so important is something that we touched on last week, it being the calming best friend of estrogen. So it's like the yin to estrogen's yang. So estrogen's quite a growth kind of, I guess, pushy hormone. It's great, but if it's just left to run the show without its calming best friend saying, "Whoa, calm down," it can run off and make your periods heavy, and things like breast pain. All that, the most major thing really would be the heavy periods. And what progesterone is doing is it's coming along and it's lightening, it's keeping your periods nice and light. Obviously not too light, we also don't want them to be too light, but it's just sheltering your body basically, and your brain, from the effects of estrogen being the dominating or in excess hormone. And really it's the body's natural kind of anti-anxiety calming hormone. It helps your body or your nervous system to deal with stress. It helps you to sleep better. It helps to support your mood. It can really be thought of as kind of like nature's anti-anxiety kind of hormone, really. And it's also supportive of metabolism, which is really important, especially as we move into our 40s and menopause. It supports our muscle mass. It supports your thyroid. It helps to prevent puffiness. So the kind of puffiness around your fingers and ankles that you might experience at various times in the cycle, because it's a natural diuretic. So it's just important for so many things. It also protects your brain. It protects cognition, memory, learning, all of these things. But I'd say the biggest things that people experience with the loss of progesterone is issues with their sleep and their mood, particularly irritability, things that may not have stressed them out a month before or 5 years before, however long before, are suddenly just really a big problem for them, and they're just finding it difficult to deal with the same life load that they had before. That would be a big sign of low progesterone. So we really don't want to lose it.
No, but sadly it is kind of part of life that we
Yeah.
do. So what can we do at least to ensure we can keep it around as much as possible for as long as possible? What is within our control?
So the main reason that we start to lose more and more progesterone in our 40s during perimenopause is, really ovulation. So ovulation, it's made as a result of ovulation, which I'll explain in a second. But ovulation would sometimes be hard to achieve for a woman in her 20s and 30s. It kind of, it really depends on various factors that we're going to talk about. But it just becomes even harder during perimenopause to ovulate every month. And that is the only way that we make progesterone. We will make a tiny bit of progesterone without ovulation, but not the amount that your body needs for all of those things that I just talked about, all those protective things and the sleep and the anti-anxiety.
So also, just to say as well, because estrogen can sometimes be really, really high, we also need more. Technically, we would need more to balance estrogen, and so it's also that contrast, isn't it, between them being high and then this lower production of estrogen and progesterone.
Yeah.
I'm mincing my words now. Sorry, I interrupted. You continue.
No, exactly. We need it. This is the time when we're not making it as much as before, and we need it more than before now. So yeah, it's annoying. But really what's happening is every month when we ovulate, so hopefully, when we do have a healthy cycle and we ovulate, one of your ovaries after ovulation produces progesterone with a tiny little gland called the corpus luteum, which is basically is a temporary gland that's formed during the process of ovulation. And then that little gland makes this progesterone. The gland will last around 10 to 11, 14 days, really different, depends on the woman. And that gland will continue to make progesterone during that second half of your cycle, so the luteal phase that we've talked about before. And then it starts to taper off just before you come on, you know, your next cycle begins. So that's how we make that beautiful amount of progesterone every month. So if we're ovulating every month, fantastic, we'll always have great levels of progesterone. As we start to have more months where we don't ovulate, which are known as anovulatory cycles or non-ovulatory cycles, they become more and more common. They happen more often in your 40s. So if you're, I kind of liken it to 12 months. Let's say you're ovulating every month for 12 months, you've got a great amount of progesterone, and then you start to ovulate every other month, or even every 2 months you don't ovulate, or every 1 month you don't ovulate. That's just, overall, you're just having far less progesterone. You know, and the months that you don't ovulate, you really will feel it. So what we can do, though, you know, in practical terms, is the biggest blockers are stress. Stress is one of the biggest blockers, one of the main ones. And it's a factor that probably affects most women, especially at this stage of our life, because we're probably going to have a bigger life load in our 40s than we would have had in our 20s and 30s. Obviously, that's different for every woman. But in your 40s, I think, I don't know, you kind of tend to have more responsibility. You might have to take life a little bit more seriously because of that responsibility. You know, you're just more focused on your work, on your career, you know, and maybe it's children. And obviously women in their 40s could have young children, or maybe teenage children, or even older children. And either way, they all come with it's all stress. They all come with their own different types of stress. Elderly parents that aren't well, worrying about, you know, loved ones who aren't well. So there's just a lot going on in your 40s that probably increases the fact that stress is going to be one of the biggest blockers. And the reason that stress is is going to block ovulation is because when your brain, we've talked about it before, that your menstrual cycle is basically dictated by your brain speaking to your ovaries. It's telling your ovaries what to make at what time. So it's telling your ovaries, make all this estrogen so that you can ovulate. But when your brain perceives stress, so any stress at all, you know, all the emotional, financial, worrying about paying a bill or next month's mortgage, work stress, running for the train, being stuck in traffic, worrying about loved ones, anything at all, when your brain perceives that, it thinks that you're under stress, you know, you're under threat, and it does not want you to have a baby. It's not going to allow that to happen. So even though we're not actually potentially trying to have a baby, we still need to ovulate, because ovulation is, you know, basically it's the main event of a menstrual cycle. Whether it does, obviously it leads to pregnancy if you want it to, but aside from fertility, ovulation is just so important, so that we, you know, make progesterone. But your brain won't let your ovaries allow that to happen when there's stress around. So
yeah, it's just like, it's not safe. It's not
yeah,
safe to have a baby right now, so we're going to shut this down.
exactly. And then the result of that is you don't ovulate. And you can't say to your brain, hey, I'm not trying to get pregnant, just let me ovulate anyway, please.
I need my progesterone, please.
To say that. Yeah, your brain doesn't know. So it's just like, no, you're not going to ovulate this month. And if you have a super stressful month, or a super stressful few months, you're likely not ovulating on those months at all. So that's why stress is one of the biggest blockers for a lot of women. And then other things like inflammation present in the body.
I just want to stop you there first before you go into the rest of the list, and just say that we're talking about perimenopause, and obviously stress is really important for perimenopause. But just to say that this is actually applicable to all women, because whatever time of life you're in, because, you know, some women are like really stressed, and then they have problems with their periods and their cycles, because they're not ovulating, and that's what happens usually with a lot of people with PCOS. So it's also just to say that this stress piece in ovulation is important across the board. It's not just specific to, you know, after you turn 40, watch out for your stress, because stress comes at us in all different shapes and forms across a lifetime, and it's unique to the individual. But at the end of the day, it's not helpful if you want to have healthy, balanced hormones, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So in your early 30s or late 20s, you can have a lot of extra stress that might have come at you in the form of anything, you know, bereavement, anything at all. And that, you know, that's likely going to affect your ovulation at that time of your life as well. So absolutely, stress will have an impact on ovulation anytime. It's just that it's so much harder to ovulate in your 40s, and
then the stress makes it even harder.
yeah.
So what else? I know I interrupted you and you were just about to go into into talking about some of the other factors which impact ovulation. So stress is like the big one. It's the lion in the room, like literally. And so what else is there? What else can impact ovulation?
So other factors would be if there's inflammation present in your system. So not the kind of acute inflammation that you would get to fight an infection or something in the moment, but the chronic inflammation is inflammatory. The chronic inflammation, obviously Anna talks a lot about that. So there's loads to learn in your posts about that. Insulin resistance, so essentially that's blood sugar dysregulation. If it's causing high levels of insulin and then that leads you to go into an insulin resistant state, then that will can block ovulation. PCOS as well, the condition, and there's a big link there between insulin resistance and PCOS as well. Nutrient deficiencies, there's a lot of nutrients that go in. It's a heavy, ovulation takes a lot of nutrients to work properly. So if we're on low calorie diets or just under eating in general or cutting out various food groups, you know, if you're not getting those particular nutrients that are needed, which we can talk about, that can block it as well. Just under calories. So if you see these people who go on these crazy restrictive diets where they just have like 1,200 calories a day and for months on end, they can lose their periods completely, which is obviously then if they're not cycling at all, they're not making any progesterone. And just also being on the pill or implant or having just come off those, because it can take the body a while to rebalance itself. Because if you have those pills, obviously that's going to block ovulation as well.
And I'd say a big one is also low fat diet, because these steroid hormones, sex hormones, are made from fats. They're made from cholesterol, and we also need healthy cell membranes and mitochondria, which for the signaling and the communication between molecules, and we really need good fats in our diet to create the hormones and also the healthy cell membranes as well. So even if you're eating adequate calories but your diet is low in fat, that can still be a concern.
Yeah, exactly. I think fat's probably one of my favorites to get women on increasing, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely don't have that problem being on a ketogenic diet. I've got loads of fats. Like my cells are hopefully all very, very happy.
Yeah, so I think obviously those are the factors, but the main one we could probably focus on today would be stress, and a couple of other things like the various nutrients that are needed and things which we've just touched on a little bit. But as well as stress management, sleep falls into that as well. So the loss of progesterone can lead to sleep issues because, as I said, it's one of the biggest things it affects is sleep and your kind of nervous system support and your ability to deal with stress, which will affect sleep. And then lack of sleep will obviously make those sorts of things worse as well. So the biggest thing, I guess, and also another thing to say is that the reason I think we should just focus on stress today mostly is because even all of the other things I just mentioned, like inflammation, insulin resistance, they're all massively impacted by stress and lack of sleep anyway. So it's kind of like putting the cart before the horse if you're just looking at those things and not addressing the fact that there may be, a life load to look at, because that can happen.
Very often people want to say, what supplements can I take?
Yeah.
Or what foods can I eat? And yes, carefully chosen supplements can be very helpful. Carefully chosen foods can be very helpful as well. But, you cannot out-supplement your lifestyle. And that's something I've definitely had, really, really understood from my chronic fatigue journey, is that stress piece, that nervous system piece is the ultimate, game changer. So what are some top tips or easy things that people can do? Unfortunately, you know what? It's not easy. Let's just be honest. It actually involves a lifestyle reevaluation and change on multiple levels. Let's just be clear about that. But where can someone start so it's not too overwhelming?
I think where they would start is first of all, just having a good look, like kind of taking a step back, maybe taking some time to sit down and have a good look at what is your day-to-day life like how busy are you on a day-to-day basis? How do you start the day? How soon after you wake up are you kind of on, you know, switched on and already doing everything that you need to do for that day? Are there any breaks in that day? If so, what do they look like? So what are you actually doing on those breaks? And then when do you actually finish? When do you finally sit down and chill, if you do? And then, you know, what time are you getting to bed? How is your sleep? So just kind of taking a look at the whole picture first. And because what you really want to identify is, are there moments, like, do you have plenty of sort of white space in your diary, not just in the month, but even in a day? And for some women, especially, you know, in their 40s with this bigger life load, maybe they might think, but I can't have any white space. But actually, we do need plenty of it. We think we can't have it because we've got so much responsibility and so much to do, and how can we have some time out when we've just got all this stuff to do? But the fact is, I mean, in my experience, and I think a lot of other women's as well, is that it never ends. The to-do list never goes away. The same things, you know, you have to do the same things all the time anyway. And actually, if you start to implement these kind of periods of white space throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your month, you'll find that you're way more productive anyway, because mentally and physically you're able to deal with these things better. But I always get clients to just, first of all, like, we'll discuss it together as well, like, what does your day look like? And for example, a client I spoke to a few weeks ago was saying that when she gets up in the morning, she has, like, I think I mentioned this before as an example, she has about 20 minutes to get out the door, and then she's straight on the tube to work. And then her day doesn't finish until 6 o'clock. And then she comes home, she has to pick up a child, she has to sort the dinner. And the day is literally just switched on. She's constantly switched on. Her lunch break, I think, is about half an hour, but she doesn't go outside. She just eats her food and then gets back on.
And a half an hour, realistically, if you've been, say, switched on from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m., what's the maths on that? That's like 7 hours. If you've been 7 hours winding up your nervous system, how can you even expect it to settle in such a short amount of time? You know, and then it's like we go again, another 7 hours of just constant. And, you know, even just something is like giving yourself a little break, I guess, in the middle of that 7.5 hours, and I think you spoke about in the previous video, starting a little bit more slowly if you can. Those little changes can really have a big impact by the end of the day.
Absolutely, yeah, it all adds up. And also, I think just looking at what you're doing in the morning, like this particular client, and I definitely used to do this when I used to work in the city, is just get up in time to leave the house, you know, to get up in time to shower, dress, maybe make breakfast and take it with me. But just, I would work backwards and think, well, how much time do I need? Only 20 minutes. I'll just get up and do that and then leave the house. And then I would run to the station every morning to make the train, and turn up at work absolutely exhausted before it's even started. And then the whole day is just constant like that. Something I was going to say and I've lost it. But then it's really just thinking, the other thing I was going to say is that on top of that sort of day, a lot of women are, and this was definitely me at one point, are also fitting exercise into their week, but it's the sort of high intensity kind of like HIIT sessions or spin classes or boot camps or intense CrossFit sessions, or kind of long distance runs. And that's kind of all they're managing to do. They're doing the 3 sessions a week. And actually what they're doing there is just adding to that stress level. So stress.
And I want to just share here as well, like from a personal perspective, is I never used to think that I overtrained, because I was like, yeah, I do like 3 gym sessions a week and it's weightlifting and I do some walking and I do some yoga. But what I wasn't acknowledging was, like, when I was at the gym, I was like really pushing my body to its limits. And then when I was at yoga, it was like hot yoga. It was like really, really super intense. And then sure, you know, maybe my body would have been able to handle that if I didn't have all the other X, Y, and Z going on in my life. So, you know, we've used this term like life load. And, you know, my whole experience with chronic fatigue syndrome, I'm like, I'm fine, I'm not overtraining. But overtraining is it's not so much about the overtraining, it's also about your ability to recover from what you're asking your body to do. And what may seem like a normal workout is not normal. It can be too much if,
Mm.
you know, you're not eating right, sleeping right, and if you don't have the spaciousness in your routine to allow for restoration.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you're adding to that stress load with the sort of more intense activity when you already have an intense day, that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's another, you know, your brain isn't going, your brain is perceiving, let's say, the HIIT session or the 10K run. The brain isn't going, oh, it's okay, she's just running for 10 kilometers because she wants to run. Your brain is saying, whoa, why are we running for 10 kilometers? Something must be wrong. Plus you've been busy all day and you know, you rush out in the morning. Like the brain doesn't know what you're doing. It just perceives some sort of threat. And then that's, you know, that's telling your ovaries not to ovulate. So little things like looking, first of all, just sitting down and looking at your day, your week, your month. Where is there white space? Do you have a slow morning? Do you take the time? Do you have some time for yourself in the morning before you actually leave the house, or if you work from home, before you actually start work? Or is it just rush, rush, rush? Do you have a break where you might go for a walk? You might be in nature. That's absolutely fantastic. Like there's loads of research to show how beneficial being out in nature, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy like a nature reserve, but it could just be your local green space across the road, or a park, or a common if you have one near you, the beach, anything that's nature. So helpful for reducing the stress response, just sending a signal to the brain that everything's calm. So maybe you are getting out to do that for 20 minutes, half an hour every day, then great. If you're not, and your break isn't really a break and it's indoors and it's switched on, you're checking emails while you're, you know, trying to eat, then that's not really a break. And then if that evening you're then after work logging off and going off to a spin class, or, you know, boot camp or something, it's looking at all of those things and seeing where you can just make little changes. So for example, if a client was to say 3 times a week I do a spin, I just keep using spin as an example because it's just the only one I can think of right now.
Because
But
everybody bought a Peloton in lockdown.
yeah, exactly. um, and the reason I say spin class is because they're usually quite intense and they're long. They're like 45 minutes to an hour. My sister has a bike at home, for example, and she just uses it for 10-20 minutes at a nice slow pace, a few times a week, or even every day, just to move her body. She's not doing anything majorly intense for too long, but that's why I say spin classes, because they do tend to be quite intense. Then I would say, can you replace 1 or 2 of those with yoga, but preferably not hot yoga, or some sort of power intense yoga? Could you maybe replace one of them with a yin class, and one of them with a slower flow? And initially some women can be really resistant to that, and I definitely was in my past, where you just think, well, that's not exercise, that's not going to help me lose weight or stay in shape. But actually what you would be so surprised to learn is that by removing some of that excess life load, and exercise is included in that, as we just said, and replacing it with some exercise, practices that are restorative and allow your brain to calm and reduce cortisol, reduce those stress hormones, you will actually find, if you do have, for example, a weight loss, fat loss goal, that you're actually going to achieve it a lot better that way than if you were to just carry on with those training sessions.
Because it's so stressful for the body, you know, when you're already stressed, you're pushing your body really hard, that's creating blood sugar imbalances, it's feeding into any sort of insulin resistance, which may be manifesting below the surface. Is just, there's so much going on there. And I know for me personally, like exercise is such a big part of my life. It has been for such a long time. It was one of the hardest things to sort of, like, I think of my little hands like gripping onto it and then like kind of slowly having to release. And so something I would also just say is that it's actually also beneficial to move little and often versus big chunks of the
Mm.
day. So sometimes people will be sitting in front of their laptop, stress, and then they go and they do their hour workout or whatever it is. And so what can be more helpful, if anybody has any sort of fear of letting go of those bigger workouts, is actually just to focus on moving a little bit more often, but just little bits. So like when I'm sitting on a chair here while I'm talking to you, and what I'll probably do once we're finished is I'll just, you know, do like a little bit of stretching, or I'll do some like sun salutations, or I'll just go for a little 5-minute walk, just something to, you know, to keep my body moving throughout the day. And then that can, if somebody does have a weight loss goal, that's actually better for you to do
Yeah.
those little bits more often than big chunky workouts.
Totally, and it's so much more doable, isn't it? Like you might have all the intentions of doing an hour later of something, but then you just don't have that whole hour, so then you just don't do it at all. So it's much more achievable that way. And as an example, I know because more and more people are still working from home nowadays, even though, you know, things have slightly returned to normal. So I work from home, and I'll just do similar to you, like so I have like a little Qigong routine, which is 10 minutes. Which I might use not necessarily every day. I've got a few different things to go for. So it could be a 10-minute Qigong routine, a 10-minute yoga flow, sometimes even a 5-minute yoga flow, or 20 minutes. So I've got lots of different, you know, there's so much available online. I've got a few different subscriptions, but even so with YouTube, there's loads of stuff on there. So it could be 20 minutes of yin, and then later on in the day, 10 minutes of a flow. And then at the end of the day, I might go for a walk for anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour, or first thing in the morning go for a walk. Kind of depends on the weather, and I just sort of plan the day according to the weather and how bright it is and stuff in the morning. But just those little bits add up by the end of the day. And you said to me the other day, we were having a discussion, you may remember, about a workout that I wanted to do, a weight session, and I didn't feel that I had it in me actually to do it. It would have been like 40 minutes. And you suggested, why don't you just break it down across the whole day? And I did. I broke it into 3 sections. And like I said, I'm at home, so it's easy for me to kind of just walk away from the desk and go over that and do those things. And I've got the weights at home. But even if you are back in the office or you're just out at work, think about that in terms of walking. So could you do 20 minutes before work, whether that's around your local park, then back home again, get ready for work, or whether it's on your way to work and you just take a longer route, or you don't drive there, or you don't get the bus there anymore, you just walk. And then could you do another 10-20 minutes at lunchtime, and then again at the end of the day another 10-20 minutes, and then maybe you know, if you wanted to do something at home, or you did a class, great. But that's just, I would, you know, just chunk it down into where can you find these little pockets of time to just move.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been doing this recently. So I live on the 3rd floor. So I've got like 45 stairs to get up to my flat. And so what I sometimes just do is I'll leave the house, go down the stairs, just walk to a tree, a specific tree out on the street, and then I walk back and walk up the stairs. And that's like 5 minutes. And just doing that at least once mid-morning, at least once mid-afternoon, just breaks things up. And then I'll do some other little stretches and bits and bobs as well. But yeah, it's just making things simple and easy to implement within your day. So it shouldn't be another stress, but then moving more, reducing the total stress load from your workout can be very beneficial in terms of supporting stress management, and then ovulation, and then progesterone production. So what else, Francesca, if we're thinking about supporting people to ovulate more regularly, to have progesterone for longer, what else do people want to be thinking of?
So majorly you know, I just mentioned nature and things like that, just having more white space, getting outside, focusing, looking at your exercise and seeing if it's just too much, what can you change. Sleep, so supporting sleep is massive. Again, it's easier said than done if someone is just having a really hard time, and both myself and Anna, we you know, we go through those periods of time as well. It can be really frustrating, but the most powerful thing to do that is within your control is look at your evening routine. So I would always say, okay, if you're struggling with sleep, there is probably something that you can improve upon in your evening routine that will probably make a difference. So for example, one of the biggest things we can do to help ourselves is, well, 2 of the biggest things: dimming the lights all around the house from early evening, I find to be really powerful. So what's happening at nighttime is that we basically have a circadian rhythm, which is our body's natural body clock, and it's governed by the hormones cortisol and melatonin. So when cortisol is high, it's the wakeful hormone, we're going to feel awake, we're going to feel wired. When melatonin's high, we're going to feel nice and sleepy, and it should induce a nice restorative deep sleep. So if we're doing things in the evening that induce cortisol, encourage cortisol, and that there's more than just stress that does that, we might not make we might not reduce our cortisol as much as we need to facilitate a good night's sleep, and we probably won't make enough melatonin either. So we may still be able to go to sleep feeling probably tired but wired. We may still fall asleep and wake up in the morning, but it probably wouldn't be very restorative. We might have woken up a few times because of the lack of melatonin. There would have been some melatonin, but just not enough to have that deep restorative sleep. So what we might be doing in the evening that would induce cortisol would be having bright lights around us all evening. That's just going to keep cortisol up. It's not going to send a signal to your brain that it's time to wind down. The sun has set. It's now time to get ready for bed. It's going to prevent that message getting to your brain. Same with having stressful conversations, scrolling through your phone all evening, WhatsApp conversations, watching the news or listening to the news. Not, just it can be a bit stimulatory.
And I'd say eating late as well. Eating late, eating foods which don't suit your body, and also thinking about if you are doing an exercise or a workout, the timing of that. So I know I can't exercise after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, otherwise then I don't sleep. So it's also kind of like optimizing those things as well.
Yeah, so if we can just, something simple like keeping the lights dim all around the house, not just the room that you're in, but everywhere, because you might walk into the hall, you'll walk into the bathroom, making sure those lights are dim, I would say from like 7, 8 o'clock. At least.
Depends what time you want to go to bed, because I sometimes go to bed at 8. So I want them down as soon as the sun goes down. That's kind of,
I think for people who are maybe not going to bed till, let's say as an example, if you go to bed around 10, then you definitely want dim lights by 8 or even 7 if possible.
2 hours before bed.
Yeah, definitely 2 hours. And then at least an hour of ideally no screen time at all. So for example, let's say you're in a brightly lit living room, you've got your phone out throughout the evening and you're checking WhatsApps and you're scrolling through Instagram and you're watching TV, and part of that is the news at 10 that's coming on, and you've got all those stressful headlines. Very difficult then to just say, right, I'm going to bed, and off you go, get into bed and try and sleep. And like I say, even when you do fall asleep, it's likely to be a not very restorative sleep, because the cortisol was too high and melatonin was too low, versus you have a lovely dimly lit living room. You switch off from the apps and scrolling on the internet and everything at least an hour before you plan to get into bed. And ideally you would turn the TV off as well, and maybe just read a book with the dim light, or do some restorative yoga or some yoga nidra meditation. If you don't know what that is, definitely look it up. That kind of thing. But if you do really want to, there are nights I will watch TV until I go to bed, but it depends what it is. I will be, I won't watch anything too kind of stimulating, but I use blue light blocking glasses, which will just help. I'll wear them throughout the evening. They're like red tinted, and they'll help to block the blue light that comes through from lights in the TV. It's not a green light to just go and leave the telly on and the lights on, but it will just be able to help reduce the impact of those lights on your cortisol release throughout the evening. So I think those would probably be the biggest things I would say that could help facilitate better sleep.
I'll just share my personal experience is that I've found when I have slept badly, or when I've had problems falling asleep, it's because I'm too wired. And my evening routine is always the same, but I've actually found it's much more for me personally about what's happened earlier in the day. So if I've had a very stressful day and I've spent the whole day winding up my nervous system, I need more time for it to unwind. So I could be ticking all the boxes and doing all of the things that you've described, but if what happened the 12 hours prior to that wasn't appropriate for me and my body and my nervous system, it's like it's not even enough at that stage to really calm my system down. Obviously, it depends on the person and their unique nervous system. So I'd say if you kind of feel like, well, I'm doing all of those things, but I'm still struggling to get to sleep, then I would also look earlier in the day and go back to the previous conversation that we've just had about taking those little breaks and how you're sort of managing your nervous system throughout the day. Because even for me, sometimes from my past experience, I'd have a lot of white space, as you've referred to. But if your body is still in fight or flight when you're in white space, it's not really white space anymore, technically. I mean, the white space is more about the timing, but it's not restful rest, maybe is a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like calming the body down so that that sleep routine can work for you, I think is really important. And then also blood sugar imbalances. If your blood sugar is imbalanced or destabilized during the night, that can potentially also lead to poor quality sleep. And so we really want to get that right as well.
Yeah. And your Instagram page is a wealth of resources, information about that, I would say. But yeah, I mean, even things like the only caffeine I drink is loose leaf, comes from loose leaf green tea. But I've found that if I have a third cup, for example, even if it's before 1, it does affect my sleep that night. So I know my sweet spot is 2 cups. And you wouldn't, you know, thought that from green tea. You think, well, that only really happens with coffee. But and also that wouldn't be the same for somebody else. Yeah, so really just looking, they say that how you start your day has a huge impact on how, kind of determines how you sleep that night. So the other thing that's really helpful is exposing your eyes to natural daylight the first thing in the morning. Again, you would think, well, what's that got to do with my sleep at night? But it's all to do with that cortisol, melatonin rhythm, the circadian rhythm. And if you can tell your brain first thing in the morning, it's daylight, you know, the sun is up, and help to increase cortisol first thing in the morning with that exposure to natural daylight, that's the only way you'll really tell it, that can help the regulation at night. And if on these dark mornings you can use a 10,000, this is what it's called, 10,000 lux, Lux light box, which are available on Amazon. They're about, mine was about £25, I think.
Yeah, I've actually just ordered one. It's coming today. I'm so excited.
Oh, it's so great. Mine is one that you have to switch on yourself. You can buy, the more expensive ones can work as an alarm without any noise. You can turn the alarm noise off. And the way the alarm would work is if you wanted to wake up around 7, you would turn it so that at 6:30 it starts to slowly make the sun rise. And then the 10,000 light is there by 7 o'clock. So that's lovely. They're more expensive. The cheaper ones you have to turn on yourself. But as soon as I wake up, I just turn it on, leave it on for, they say at least, the research says at least, I think it's 30 minutes exposure, either to the 10,000 lux light box or to natural daylight outside. Doesn't have to be sunny, but just natural daylight. First thing in the morning can be really helpful to support sleep.
Yeah, that sounds good. So we've talked about stress management, we've talked about sleep. Is there anything else we need to touch on?
I mean, in terms of diet, definitely important, as you touched on, is nourishment. So nutrient deficiencies is the big reason why people don't ovulate, as women don't ovulate as well. Specifically, I think protein is really important. So those amino acids are really helpful for so many things, especially hormone regulation, but also for ovulation. And you mentioned fats, and particularly, like you said, it's to make those steroid hormones, which are our sex hormones. We need the raw materials in the body to make them, even cholesterol from food that people are scared to eat. So even things like that is really important, and saturated fat. So that, for example, butter, things like ghee, and EPA and DHA from omega-3 fat is specifically important as well. So that would be your oily fish predominantly, so salmon, mackerel, trout.
And what nutrient deficiencies are you looking for specifically? Like, what should people be looking out for?
Yeah, so in terms of obviously not through testing, but looking at the diet, for example, I'd be working with someone looking closely at their current diet. I'd be looking for how much zinc they might be getting already from their diet, selenium. So zinc and selenium are really key nutrients for ovulation to actually happen. Also,
And the thyroid as well.
yeah, and for healthy thyroid, which can block ovulation, underactive thyroid can actually block it as well. Vitamin A, vitamin D, again, the omega-3s and other fats. So I'd really be looking B vitamins, I think I said magnesium, really just looking to make sure that all of these, you know, how many foods is there a variety of foods that containing all these different foods, nutrients, even things like choline. So it would be looking at the diet and seeing if it's restrictive in any way, if, you know, low calorie, low nutrients, and trying to increase things that way. And obviously supplements can form an important part of the program as well. But it really, like we said before, it's all about getting the diet and lifestyle right first, and then those things can sort of be the cherry on top. Similar to Vitex, which you might have some people probably know about Vitex agnus castus. If you were to Google how to increase progesterone, that might come up, and yeah, it could be a helpful herb to use as a tincture, but you have to get the diet and lifestyle right first. It wouldn't just be a magic bullet without those things, like we said before.
You can't out supplement an inflammatory diet, and you can't out supplement your lifestyle. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, those are the things which are hard for people to change. But they are the things that, if you are prepared to change them, will really have a positive impact on how you feel and your quality of life.
Yeah, and it can be so simple. I mean, we've said it already, but just to give another example, a client of mine a few years ago was doing the typical sort of boot campy style workouts about 4 or 5 times a week. And she replaced she first went down to 4 a week, but she replaced 2 of those with a yin yoga session and another slow kind of flowy yoga. And within months, she wasn't having periods before, and within months, her periods started coming back. She might have made some other tiny little changes from similar things that we've discussed today, but those were the most significant, and that's all she did in the first instance. We continued to work together and continue to change other things slowly, but what I'm trying to say is that you can just pick 1 or 2 things to start doing first, rather than thinking, oh my God, I have to overhaul my diet, I have to overhaul my lifestyle, I have to move jobs and get rid of my family. Like you don't do those things. You can just take 1 or 2 things from what we're talking about today, even if that walk in nature for 20 minutes every day.
Yeah, and I shared the story in the first video about my client who just was, has a very stressful job and kind of just said, okay, life is stressful and I'll take holidays every now and again. And she decided to implement a one minute of breathing every hour on the hour. And she said that, just those 8 minutes of breathing that she did across the day made a significant impact in how she felt at the end of the day. And so I think it's really important for people to understand, like, small things can make a big difference, and it's worth giving it a try and exploring it for yourself.
Yeah, even for me, that I think I mentioned this to you before. I did a course in Qigong a few years ago. It was like an hour a week for 6 weeks, and it really was life changing. I didn't do anything else other than add that in to my week. And then I started to do 10 minutes every other day at home. Lots of free stuff on YouTube for 10-minute Qigong routines, and again found it game changing. It really just helped I felt like a different person. I felt so calm, and that's all I'd done. And for some reason life got in the way and I stopped doing it for years, and I've recently brought it back in about a year ago. 10 minutes every other day, or I think it was like 3 or 4 times a week, and again the same good feelings came back. I thought, why did I stop doing this? Again, about 6 months ago I stopped doing it, and it was only the other day I said to myself, why don't you just do that again? It's like, why would you stop doing something that was so helpful? But for whatever reason I did. I started it again now, and again I can start to feel those positive, those helpful feelings coming back. So just so simple, nothing else.
Yeah, simplicity works, and it's really about picking something you can be consistent with. So don't pick the most complicated thing if you don't know you can stick to it. Always say pick something you can be consistent with for 2 to 4 weeks, and then add in the next thing.
Yes.
So I'm just conscious of the time, and we need to have a very quick chat about micronised progesterone.
Oh, of course. How can we not? Yeah. So obviously we're saying that ovulation gets harder and harder, and then therefore we're producing less and less progesterone. We can do lots of things to help encourage as much ovulation, as many ovulatory cycles as possible until we reach menopause, and that would be fantastic. But there's also the fact that we will eventually reach menopause and not be ovulating anymore, and therefore not making that amount of progesterone. And there's also the fact that even though, despite our best efforts in our 40s, we may still have just too many non-ovulatory cycles, compared to what we actually want. So hormone replacement therapy in the form of progesterone, known as micronised progesterone, it comes in capsules, can be really helpful even before menopause. So even for some women, like midway through perimenopause, so around 45, 46, it could be good to ask your doctor about it. And what you're asking for is micronised progesterone is also called body identical progesterone. In the UK, the brand name is Utrogestan. And it's essentially, it's exactly the same as the progesterone, the real progesterone that your body makes. So that is sometimes confused with progestins that are found in for example, hormonal contraception or implant. It's not the same thing. That is like it's touted as a progesterone, but it isn't chemically the same as the real progesterone that our body makes. And it can actually not, all the amazing benefits that we explained today about progesterone, the real progesterone, progestins don't really have those same benefits. In fact, it can be the opposite. So we definitely don't want to confuse the two. So I would speak, if if you're feeling like you're in perimenopause and your sleep is just a nightmare, despite your best efforts, things just aren't as good as you really want them to be, then you could speak to your doctor about adding in Utrogestan, micronised progesterone.
Yeah, so basically, if someone is they're having trouble sleeping, they're experiencing increased amounts of anxiety, breast tenderness, weight gain, there actually can be so many symptoms like low energy, mood changes. If you're just like, I don't feel like myself anymore, I think this is perimenopause, then it's really important to go to your doctor and ask for body identical hormones, or just say, can we have a conversation about body identical hormones? I think I'm going through perimenopause. I understand progesterone, body identical progesterone could be helpful for me. Can you tell me more? Can you help me with this? I think that's kind of the conversation you want to have, because often people don't know what to ask for. Their doctor poo-poos them or tells them there's nothing they can do. And I think it's really important that people know there are things you can do. This is what it is. You need to find someone who's prepared to help you with this.
Yeah, and sometimes a doctor might say, oh, you're not menopausal yet, so we don't need to talk about HRT. But what you're saying to them is, oh, I'm just talking about progesterone at this stage because I'm aware that it's declining in perimenopause. And then when you do reach menopause itself, then yeah, you want to have the conversation about body identical estrogen, but you still want to make sure you're keeping that progesterone in as well. Like, why would you don't just want to have estrogen, you want both? So yeah, it's an important conversation to have.
Yeah, and I see a lot of clients who are just on estrogen, who may be past menopause, but their doctors only put them on estrogen. And then you always see someone who's on both, and I'm like, you're going to a good doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like what Anna said, have that conversation with your doctor, and if they're not up for that at all, if they're just dismissing it,
Change
then
doctors.
yeah. And we've mentioned before, but it's Dr. Louise Newton on I think her website is the Menopause Doctor, but if you just Google Dr. Louise Newton, she's fantastic. She had her website has a ton of resources of even like how to speak to a GP, what to ask for. She's a GP herself, but she just specialises in menopause, and there aren't many doctors that specialise in menopause, so you kind of take what we can get, and Dr. Louise Newton is a great one to use for resources.
Brilliant. So I just think we had one question, and I was wondering if you know the answer to this. Do you know anything about progesterone hypersensitivity?
No, I have heard of it, but I don't know much about it. That would probably be a completely different topic, different side of things on what we're talking about today. I have heard of it. I'm just not aware.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I would say that I'm aware of is there is a certain autoimmune condition where your body reacts to your own progesterone. So people have like an inflammatory response or immune attack to their own progesterone. And obviously, if that's you, you really want to work with someone a doctor who specializes in autoimmunity, to get officially diagnosed, and then find out about the appropriate treatments for you.
Yeah, and that's why, as we practitioners always say, one size never fits all, because if there is somebody out there listening to this with that condition, then yeah, you probably need a completely different approach to things.
Yeah, in that case, we're looking at more supporting the immune system and immune regulation.
Yeah,
it's probably like you're going to need some medications as well from a specialist practitioner. Good. Is there anything else you wanted to share as we wrap up today?
I think that is everything. I would love if anyone has questions when they're watching the replay, then great to address those. But other than that, I think that's everything.
Yeah. So next week we're going to do like a Q&A session, and we might just talk about testosterone a little bit, just to touch on it. So if you do have any questions you want us to address in next week's video, then you can send them comment on this post. You can send them via DM. I'm going to send this video out to my mailing list, so you can always send me an email back. I'm sure Francesca will do the same. So we are here to support you, help you, answer your questions, and bring you the support that you need. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening and watching today. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, thanks everyone. See you next week.
Bye.